Hashem, today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah daf Lamed Hey, Avodah Zarah 35. We're going to start Be'ezus Hashem Yisparach on the bottom of Lamed Hey, of Lamed Daled on the base of 34b. Today's 3 lines from the bottom. Today's daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. And this Eis Tzara. The Gemara was discussing the distinction between the peresh. The peresh is the waste, the excrement of a shor hanisfal, an ox that was stoned, versus a shor avodas kochavim, an ox that was worshipped for idolatry. That the peresh, the feces of the ox that was stoned, that you can use to betroth a woman if you want, so to speak. You can get benefit, whereas the ox of the idolatry you can't. And so now in today's daf yomi, the Gemara says these idea is learned in our Mishnah. Says Rava, Amarava Travayotinanadi. But we learned these ideas in our Mishnah. Because there was a conversation between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel said to Rabbi Yeshua, why are we not allowed to eat the cheese of the idolaters? Rabbi Yeshua responded, because they take this cheese and they're ma'amid it. That means like that's the chemical process of curdling the cheese. They do it with the keva of an avela. The keva is the stomach, and it has in it this milk, and so they put their milk in there, and that is this chemical process that turns the milk into cheese. And so since they do it in this keva of an avela, therefore of this this animal that was not slaughtered, we can't eat it. So the Kamahadaway, Rabbi Shmuel responded, "What are you talking about? Kevas ola chamura mikevas nevela." Cave and Avela, you're allowed to get benefit, but the cave of an oil offering, that's a korban, you can't get any benefit from it. And we know it's stricter. And we know that the Kohanim were allowed to eat from the cave of the oil because we said it was so disgusting, it didn't mean anything. So we see from here, so we call these Surya Hana Sharo Pershayo. So even though on top of 35a, even though an oil offering is prohibited to get any benefit, nevertheless, its waste is permitted. And then Rabbi Yehoshua responded, no, it's because they are mamid in the keva, in the stomach of the calves of the idolaters, and meaning to say that you can't get any benefit from it. Become a hadarway, and then Rabbi Shmuel responds, well, if that's the case, the cheese of the idolater should not be only prohibited to eat, should be prohibited to get any benefit from it. We call that avodas kochavim aser pershayu. We see from here that this is the source for this idea that when it comes to the calf of an idolatry, you can't even get any benefit from the waste because the waste of the idolatrous animal is something that you actually wanted. That the person who has the idol, who's worshiping it, wants it to be bigger, so he wants all aspects of it. And so therefore, that's the reason why you can't use the waste. So it's inferred from our Mishnah. The Gemara says, "V'lo hadarway." And then Rabbi Shmuel said, you can't get any benefit, you shouldn't be able to get any benefit. And Rabbi Yeshua changed the topic. He still told Davar Acher. He changed the topic. The Gemara says, but why did Rabbi Yeshua respond? Well, either way, Mishum Deleisel Isur Be'ene, that Rabbi Yeshua could have responded. The reason why you can benefit from the cheese of the idolater is because the prohibition is not really there. Meaning to say, there's nothing in the stomach. It's not even there. That it's not relevant because the prohibition is not found there. So why didn't he respond that? Meaning to say it's non-existent and it's this disgusting thing in the stomach, so it's not really there. So why didn't he give that answer? And the proof of that is the Amurius L'Rabbanan, because we have this concept of this that the morius, which is the intestines of the fish, according to the Rabbanan, the lo asru ba'ana, they said you're allowed to get benefit. You're allowed to get benefit from this morius. What's the reason? Isn't it because that the morius is not really, this intestines of the fish is not really there anymore, and so therefore you're allowed to get the benefit from the morius. And so too over here, the keva of the idolatry is not really there, so you should be able to get benefit. That's the reason why you get benefit from the cheese. Why didn't Rabbi Yeshua give him this answer? So the Gemara responds to that, no. The Gemara says the difference here is so the Gemara says that the difference here is because hacha kimin de ukme kamokim chashavle command the easterly surveying. No, here the whole process of the cheese. The Gemara is over there. You bring over the whole patch there, Jeff. Good morning. Here the whole process of the cheese is made through this enzyme. So even though there's not really anything that's significant in the sense of the volume in the keva, there are these enzymes, and these enzymes, even though they're very, very small, their whole purpose is to curdle the cheese. And so therefore it is considered like the prohibition is in existence there. So okay, so that's the Gemara's discussion. We see from here that even though there's a general rule that something is nullified in 60 times the amount, to be very careful about that, because if something is obviously necessary for the process, like these enzymes, which are catalysts, which make the chemical reaction in the food, then even though it's much less than 60th, even though it's a minuscule amount, it's not going to be nullified. That's a very important point to bear in mind. So he sealed a davar acher, right? So then Rabbi Yeshua changed the topic. When Rabbi Shmuel said to him, well, then the cheese should be prohibited to have benefit. If it comes from an idolatry, it should be if they make the cheese in the stomach of the idolaters, the whole cheese should be prohibited to have benefit. So Gemara says, why? What does that mean? He sealed davar acher. And he said, Rabbi Yeshua said to him, what does it mean? Kitovim dodecha miyayin. He says, how do you read it? Do you read it dodecha or dodayaf? So what is the meaning of this pasuk? Rav Dimi Amra Knesset Shrafnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rav Dimi came along. He said that the Jewish people said before God, Ribono Shalom, Arevim Alai Divrei Dodecha Yoser Miyena Shel Torah. He says that the Knesset Yisrael, the Jewish people said to God, God, the words of your Dodecha, and who are your Dodecha? The words of your Sofrim, the words of your scribes, the words of your rabbis are sweeter to me than the words of your wine, which is the wine of the Torah. I mean, to say the Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral law, the tradition of the rabbis, is even sweeter than the written words of the Torah. So it's so ironic here because the Sofer is the one who writes the written words of the Torah, but they're saying the words of the Sofrim are even more sweet to God, to Knesset Yisrael, than the written words of Torah. So the Gemara says, why do you ask specifically about this pasuk? He was, because the first part of the verse is what was drawing the attention, because it says Yishakeni min shikos piu. So basically, he says, he kisses me with the kisses of his mouth, which is a very powerful verse, a lot of Kabbalah on this verse. But this is what Rabbi Yeshua was saying to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel was asking him about the prohibition of cheese, that the Jews don't eat the cheese of the idolaters. And Rabbi Yeshua said to him, Amrle Yishmael achi, Yishmael my brother, Chashok tzfosecha zu bazu. Close your lips together, V'al tivahel hashiv, and don't be too precise to question it, meaning to say, stop asking about this decree. My time, because this decree against the cheese is it's a new decree. It's a new decree that we're not supposed to eat the cheese. And we shouldn't explain it too much. We don't want to go into too details explaining it. I mean, Gemara is going to explain, because if it's a new decree and you explain it in detail, then you think, oh, I'm helping. You're being so transparent about the reason for the decree. You're explaining it. No, the Jewish people are very problematic in this sense, in that they're always going to be asking questions, and then they will just say, oh, that's the reason it doesn't apply to me, and the decree won't end up getting accepted. So by a new decree, Don't ask too many questions. Don't discuss it too much. Just do it. My Gezerta. What's the reason for the decree? What's the reason for the decree? That's what Gemara is asking. I'm sorry? Yeah, but now, right, so of course. Meaning, say, why is there a decree? That's not what's the decree, but why is there a decree? So I'm yeah, you're right. It's ironic. We just said don't discuss, but that one it's new. But now it's many years later, so we can discuss it. I'm Mishum Nikor. That it's these are the Amoraim discussing it. So the problem is that there was uncovered, and a snake could have put his venom in it. So the Gemara says, Mishum Nikor. So why didn't they say it? Why didn't they say that that was the reason? The Gemara says no, like Ua talk about Ua Damar Ua Kigazri Gezerta Marava. When they made a decree in Eretz Yisrael, Lomegalu Taima Atracer Yarcheshata. They didn't reveal the reasoning for a year because of this. What we discussed, because they didn't want people to question it and then not accept it. Dilma Ika Inish to Lasfir Wave but maybe there'll be people who don't agree with it and they'll come to challenge it. Megadev by Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yirmiyah was questioned it. He says, El Me'ato, if that's the case, Yavesha Tishtri or Yashan Tishtri, if the whole purpose is because the cheese was uncovered when it was being made, so then if it's dry cheese or old cheese, it should be permitted. The decree shouldn't apply. The Amar Chanina Yavesh Mutter, that if the dry cheese because as he said that Yavesh, he says the dried cheese is going to be permitted because, or actually not cheese here, just the Yavesh. If you have a liquid that dried out, or if it's a liquid that became old, it's permitted because the venom doesn't allow it. And once you put the venom of the serpent in the liquid, it doesn't allow it to get old or to dry out. And so therefore, if it's the case that the reason for the decree is because of the nikor, then the old or the dry cheese should be permitted. So Amar Chanina gives a different reason why is the cheese prohibited of the idolaters. Because it's certainly the case that between the blocks of the cheese, there will remain some of the milk. And the milk that idolater made, and the Jew didn't make it, as the Jew didn't see him making it, we'll see on Mabeis, is prohibited because maybe they mixed in with it some non-kosher milk. And even though the non-kosher milk wouldn't curdle, and therefore, and since the non-kosher milk, I'm reading from the Rashi, it wouldn't turn into cheese. And so therefore, if you mix the non-kosher milk with the kosher milk, the non-kosher milk would remain as milk in between the blocks, and that will be prohibited. So that's our concern. So there will be some non-kosher milk in between. Shmuel gives a different reason. Or kavas nevela. He says, no, because they're being mamid in the skin of the nevela. The nevela is the carcass, the skin of the cave of the nevela. So Rashi explains that the keva itself is considered to be perish, like the excrement. It's disgusting, like the intestines of the animal. So that we could say, okay, you could eat, but the skin is not perish, and so therefore it's going to be prohibited because it's a legitimate part of the animal, and they use that to make it. So the Gemara says, "Hakeva gufa shar." You mean to say that the keva itself is permitted? Umiyar Shmuel. Shmuel really say that the keva of a nevela, that this perish, this excrement, the intestines of the cow is permitted. But tanan keva sa'ove kochavim mishal nevela rezu asura. But we learned in the Mishnah in Chulin that the Mishnah in Chulin says that the keva of an idolater or of a carcass is prohibited. And say, why do you need to say the cave of an idolater and the vela? The cave of an idolater is a carcass, so it would anyway be prohibited. But Amar Shmuel, and Shmuel says, I just want to read the Rashi here before we say what Shmuel says. Rashi says that Gemara is asking, does Shmuel really say that it's the skin of the nekeva nevela is prohibited, but the keva atzma of the nevela, being to say the milk that was congealed inside the stomach of the animal is permitted? Meaning they say that it's pure ba'alma when it's permitted. Does Shmuel really say this? But what about the Mishnah in Chulin that says the keva is prohibited of the idolatrous animal and of an avela? And Shmuel explained chada katani. It means it's one statement for the Mishnah. Keva shchitas ove kochavim nevela asura. He says the keva of an animal that was slaughtered for idolatry is the equivalent of a nevela and is prohibited. So we see from here that he prohibits the intestines. He says it's perish. He says it's excrement, but he says it's prohibited. So why in the Mishnah in Chulin says prohibited? Why here is he saying that it would be permitted? So the Gemara says, meaning to say, why is Shmuel here saying that the reason why it's prohibited, that the keva itself is permitted, whereas in Chulin it's obviously prohibited? So the Gemara says, "Lokacha, kan kodem chazara, kan la'achar chazara." So initially the keva was allowed, but in Chulin they prohibited it. So, or just the opposite. The Mishnah in Chulin where it says it's prohibited, that was before Rabbi Yeshua changed his mind, and he said that it became permitted. But our Mishnah here is after Rabbi Yeshua changed his mind, and therefore the keva is permitted. Look at Rashi. Rashi says that Mishnah in Chulin, the kevas ovei kochavim of an avela is prohibited. That was learned prior to Rabbi Yeshua changing his mind. That Rabbi Shmuel said because they're ma'amidin in the kevas nevela, and he says that it's not a perish. And whereas that which Shmuel said that they do it in the skin, but the keva itself is permitted, that was after he changed his mind. That Rabbi Yeshua changed his mind in his response to Rabbi Shmuel. Well, Mishnah was azamim koma, and even though the Mishnah in Chulin says that the keva is prohibited, and then we changed it from our Mishnah here, even though, by the way, we learned Avodah Zarah before Chulin, but it's because we don't, once the Mishnah is taught, we leave it there, because otherwise it messes everything up, because it was ironically, when you remember something orally, when it's transmitted orally, you never delete it. If it would be a text, you could just cross it out. But since it's an oral transmission, we don't mess around with that. Rav Malkia, and we already had this in our tractate just 2 days ago. Rav Malkia mishmei derav Ada bar Ava amar mibnei machlikim paneh b'shuman chadir. What's the reason why the cheese is prohibited? Because we smear it with the pig fat. No, he says we curdle it with the vinegar of the idolaters, which used to be wine. So obviously it's prohibited because yain nesach. No, he says you curdle it with the sap of an orla. An orla is the tree. The first 3 years it's planted, you're not allowed to eat from that tree. So they use that sap to make the cheese. Come on, who's that like? It must be. You mean to say our mission is like a minority opinion? Ki Tana, the Tanan, because we learned Rabbi Eliezer Omer Amamin Besrafa Orla Asur Neshu Peri. Rabbi Eliezer says that if you use the sap of the orla to make cheese, it's prohibited because it's considered a fruit. So, meaning to say, you say that our mission is like the minority position of Rabbi Eliezer, and Rav Nachman Yitzchak is posking like Rabbi Eliezer against Rabbi Yeshua there, and where says no, I feel the tema Rabbi Yeshua. You even say it's like Rabbi Yeshua who says that the sap is not fruit and you could eat the sap. Rabbi Yeshua he only argues with him about the sap of the trunk of a katfa the peri, but if it's the sap of the fruit itself, Modi, he would admit that is in fact the sap of the fruit itself is in fact a fruit, and so if you use it, you can't eat the cheese. Now I knew that Tanan is why we learned Rabbi Yeshua Shemati Befera Shemame Besrafa Olam Besrafa Ikarin Mutar. That's why I said Rabbi Yeshua said, I heard it that explicitly that if you curdle the cheese with the sap of these leaves or the sap of the trunk, it's mutar. But the sap of the pagan is the fruits that are like barely ripe. Then it's also neshu peri. So then it's prohibited because it's fruit. So says both according to Rav Chisda, who says that the reason is because of they use the vinegar, and according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, who says that the reason is because they use the sap of the tree, titzar ba'anah. It should also be prohibited not just to eat the cheese of the idolaters, should be prohibited to get benefit from it, because yayin nesach, the wine of the idolaters, and arla are both prohibited to have benefit from it. So it shouldn't just be prohibited to eat; it should be prohibited to have benefits. And Gemara says kasha, yeah. So those two reasons are difficult. Those two explanations are difficult. Rabbeinu Tam says on Amud Aleph, Rabbeinu Tam says that since we reject those reasons, he says we are allowed to eat the cheese today. So says Rabbeinu Tam in Dibra Mas Kochada, he says, Ki achshav lo matzinu tam pashel iser begvinas ola kochavim. We don't have a simple reason why it's prohibited, because the reason is because Nikor, because it was uncovered, like Rabbi Shua ben Levi, because we paskin like him, and we're not strict about that. So therefore, he says we can eat the cheese of the idolaters. But the Shulchan Aruch does not paskin like that, and that's not how we paskin. Talking here about hard cheese, the hard cheese, which is what they use this rennet to make. But the soft cheese, which you don't use rennet, there was never a decree about it. I mean, we call everything cheese today, but they're not talking about. They're certainly not talking about cottage cheese or cream cheese, and almost for sure not about mozzarella cheese. They're talking about the cheeses that they use the rennet in the process. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Gemara continues, Darsh, you had a question? Well, no, that today they're certainly not using. Well, if there's an OU, it's not an issue at all, obviously. But those cheeses, they're not even using any rennet, so it's not an issue. What? Yeah, it's like a cream cheese or whatever, but that's not an issue. But they still are strict about them. Well, I think the OU is still very strict about mozzarella cheese, and they require somebody to be involved in the process. But you can make the cheese as long as the Jew is there. You know, like hashkacha, the Jew is the one pouring in the rennet. But mozzarella, I don't want to speak here, out of turn. But the point is that the mozzarella, my limited understanding is that wouldn't require all that. It's just like a stringency that they're requiring it. But not everybody says you require like such strict supervision for mozzarella. Well, they're using a vegetable rennet, but the issue is if it's included in this decree of the cheese, of the gavina, because even if it's being used with a vegetable rennet, if it's a hard cheese, yeah, well, no, animal rennet is different. I'm saying then you could have other questions, but even if they're using vegetable rennet, if it is, what question is whether it's included in its decree of cheese. There are sure not, and also that if they're using an animal rennet, which is another issue about basar b'cholov. So whether or not to what degree they're using it or how they're using it. But even if there's just vegetarian rennets being used like chemical resins, we still have an issue of the cheese of the idolaters unless a Jew is there pouring it in. So what you could do is make it a partnership where the Jew owns a part of the business. I'm just giving you ideas. I'm just saying to make Jew owns a part of the business, then we wouldn't have this decree of the cheese of the idolaters. The Jew owns it. Okay. What do we do with the pasuk? After we cited earlier the pasuk v'shakeni min shakeus piyuki tovim dodecha miyayin. So now we do the next pasuk. And what does the next pasuk say? It says l'reach shmanecha tovim. So what the smell of your oil is good. Lama, what does this compare to? Lama. To what is the Torah scholar to compare to? But megula. So if you have a flask of balsamic oil, if it's uncovered, recha nodef, its smell is beautiful. Mechus, if it's covered up, ein recha nodef, then you can't smell it. Meaning, say the Torah scholar shouldn't keep things to himself, which is of course ironic since we just said keep the decree to yourself for the first 12 months. Well, not only that, if he's not keeping it to himself, the things that he doesn't understand are revealed. As it states in the pasuk, alamos ahivucha. As it states in the pasuk, alamos ahivucha, and we read it as At the end of that pasuk, and we read it as Karibei Alumos, the hidden things are revealed to you. As Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb of Blessed Memory said, that the only one who learns in the classroom is the teacher. So the more you teach, the more it's revealed. Not only that, that if a person teaches, the angel of death will love him, as it says, Olamos avucha, Karibei al mus, meaning to say on over death, al maves. Somebody who is appointed over death will love you if you're a teacher, and he won't come and get you so quickly. Not only that, he's going to inherit two worlds. This world and world to come, as it states Olamos, Pribe Uamos, or read it as Olamos. It says Olamos, read it as Olamos. It says the Mishnah, these are things that are prohibited of the idolaters, but it's not prohibited to have benefit. Chalav, the milk that idolater milked, and Yisrael roll, and the Jew didn't see it. Vapas Vashem, and the bread and their oil. Rabbi Ubeis Dino Iturashim. Rabbi in his court said that the oil was allowed. We'll see why in the Gemara, because it was decreed that it was too difficult. Shlakos, these are the cooked foods. Ukavash and the pickled food. They typically put wine in. The chometz and the vinegar of the idolaters. Vitarias is a type of small fish that was salted, and the Gemara is going to have to explain these things. Tarufa, this type of small fish that was salted, that was crushed up very small on the plate, and since you don't see it, you can't see their signs. We're not sure if it's kosher or not. They could stick other fish in here. If it's sear, the fish brine, if it didn't have the kalbit fish swimming around in it, because the kalbit, they used to raise it in the brine of kosher fish, and if there's a fish brine that doesn't have this in it, then maybe it's not kosher. This is the small fish we had yesterday, that it has no fins and scales when it's small, and the sages prohibited it because they sometimes mixed other non-kosher fish within it, and we couldn't tell which was the kosher, which was not. The korit shell chiltit, and this is like a piece of this type of vegetable called chiltit. The sages prohibited it because the non-Jews would slice it with their knife, which had the grease on it. Melech of the non-kosher animal. Melech dal pondit. This is the salt that they used to have. The Gemara is going to explain this on that they used to eat in the Roman bakeries. And hareo asurim any certain. All these are prohibited, but it's not prohibited to have benefit. So the Gemara says, what are we worried about the milk? If we're worried, they're going to switch it out. Tar chiver, tameyarak. What are you talking about? If it's kosher, it's white. If it's not kosher, it's yellowish. If you're saying they're going to mix it together, naked. Let's see if it'll turn into cheese. If it's not kosher milk was mixed in, it wouldn't turn into cheese. Gemara says, well, if the Jew wants to use it for milk, yeah, we could tell if it becomes cheese. He's buying it to use in a dish. They used to use the milk not as milk, but they would put it in a dish. They wouldn't drink it because it would spoil so quickly. They would drink it as fermented milk, as like schnapps. So he wasn't buying it for cheese; he was buying it for this dish. So he should take a little bit and turn it into cheese, and then I'll be able to tell. Mar says no. No, because even sometimes when you make the kosher cheese, you have parts of the milk that don't curdle, like the whey. Will make them a milk. So it's impossible to tell if this was the milk that was mixed in with the non-kosher milk, because some of it's not curdling. You can't tell. The alternative answer is even if you got it for the cheese, since if you mix in non-kosher milk, there's always some milk that's in between the blocks, and some of that would be non-kosher, and then the non-kosher milk would have been in there in between the cheese, and then it would be a problem because you'd be eating it. So he says the bread, the court never allowed the bread, because we said in our Mishnah that the bread of a non-Jew was not allowed. So Rabbi Yochanan said the court never allowed the bread. 1 second, from the fact that he has to say that, meaning to say People were eating it because they needed to eat it, but it was never with the sanction of the court. We call the ikam on the shari. So we see from here that somebody who allowed the bread, that there was somebody who allows it in. Yes, what happened? The Kiyasar of Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said, "Pama chasiyatzi Rabbi l'sad." At one time, Rabbi went out to the field. Ve'evi ovi kochav mo'fanav pasporni, and idolater brought in front of him the bread from a large oven, ma'feiseya. He brought a big piece of bread, very large. And I'm a Rabbi, kamena pazu, maru chachamim. So Rabbi said, "Look how beautiful this bread is. Why would they have prohibited it?" So from the fact that he said that, they said, "What do you mean maru chacham? What do you mean why they prohibited it?" Mishum chisnus. They obviously prohibited it because they were worried about, as we'll see in tomorrow's daf, that it could lead to marriage. You're socializing, you're going to marry their children. So maru chacham also basada. Yeah, but why they prohibit it in the field where it's not a fixed social scene? So when Rabbi Yochanan said it's kitzur ha'am hiter Rabbi Yapas. So when the people saw this, they thought that Rabbi had allowed the bread, and therefore they said it's permitted. Well, it's not the case. Rabbi lo hiter asapas. Rabbi wasn't allowing; he was just wondering. Rav Yosef Yitim Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda had a different version. He says, "Lo kachayimai." So this was the version with Rabbi. Oh, I'm a pama chazal Rabbi l'malkam echad. One time, Rabbi went to a place. He saw that there wasn't enough bread for the students. I'm a Rabbi. Ein kan palter. He says, "Why don't you? There's no baker to make them the bread." Kisvurna amomar. The people thought to say palter aviklam that even bringing a non-kosher, an idolater baker would be sufficient. But who lo amar ela palter. So no, Rabbi was saying, isn't there a kosher baker, a Jewish baker? Amir chaba afil ma'adamar palter aviklam. Even the one who says that the bread of the idolaters is permitted. Lo amar ela deleika palter Yisrael. He says only that when there's no Jewish baker. Malcolm dika palter Yisrael. If there's Jewish baker, everybody would say it's not allowed. Rabbi Yochanan afil ma'adamar palter aviklam. Even the one who allows a non-Jewish baker, that's only in the field of but not in the city because of concern about wedding. That wedding, is that what's happened? Aibu was eating the bread. He was biting and eating the bread of the idolaters on basically the edge of his fields. Don't repeat this because he's eating the bread of the idolaters. So the upshot of this, the bread, the pas akum, what we call it, as long as the ingredients are kosher, if it was baked by a non-Jew, one could eat it. The practice, one should be strict during the Aseret Tshuva, but the rest of the year, because one does not have to be strict to only eat pas Yisrael, even though it is a mila to do. What about milk? So milk also, there's no allowance here for the milk. So how come a lot of people are not strict about it? Chol aqua, the milk of a non-Jew, even though you give hashgacha on the milk of a non-Jew. And they're relying on a tshuva, a very important tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, who said, since the government makes it clear that the milk has to be cow's milk, then you don't have to be concerned that they're going to switch it because their business would be ruined. But if you're going to say that about the milk, then you don't even need hashgach about anything. If you say that about milk, then why not say that about all these other products that they give hashgacha on? That you don't even need hashgacha. So anyway, this is just today's daf. We'll stop here. Shkoyach.